The Nevada sun was a hammer blow on Harmony Creek, a town clinging to the edge of the desert like a stubborn weed. The year was 1885, and the newly laid railroad tracks gleamed like silver scars on the landscape, having brought both fortune and fiends to this dusty corner of the state. Townsfolk gathered outside the auction house, their faces grim under the late afternoon glare. Walter Finch stood at the back of the assembly, his weathered hands trembling, a persistent tremor that had plagued him for years. At 62, the former railroad surveyor was a tall, spare man, his silver beard neatly trimmed and his eyes holding a permanent shadow, the kind that comes from seeing a world you helped build turn cruel. He watched, his face a mask of stone, as the sweaty auctioneer, a man named Hobbs, held up his final ink drawing. "Next lot, ladies and gentlemen," Hobbs announced, his voice slick with unease. "A piece by our local talent." He stumbled on the word talent, drawing a few contemptuous snorts from the men at the front. Depicting, well, a scene at the river pass with two figures. The drawing, done on fine rice paper, was small but exquisitely detailed. Walter's precise, steady strokes had captured the stark grandeur of the Nevada sunset, its vibrant colors bleeding into the ink. Two figures stood hand in hand against the fading light, a young white woman, her features delicate, and a Chinese man, his traditional tunic rendered with quiet dignity. "Shall we start the bidding at $1? Hobbs asked, his voice cracking as Barrett Thorne shouldered his way to the front. Thorne was a man who consumed space, broad and immaculately dressed in an expensive black suit that defied the oppressive heat. At 55, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, he wore his power like a suffocating perfume. A gold watch chain was a smug slash across his vest. "I'll give you 50 cents, Thorne drawled, his voice a low rumble of arrogance. The crowd chuckled nervously. "For that piece of trash." Walter's hands tightened into fists, the knuckles white, but he remained silent, a statue of contained grief. 50 cents from Mr. Thorne, Hobbs declared, mopping his brow. "Do I hear a higher bid?" The crowd shuffled. Eyes flickered toward Walter, then darted away. No one dared challenge Barrett Thorne. 50 cents, going once, going twice. "Sold." To Mr. Thorne. Walter watched as Thorne took the drawing. The rancher held it up, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Behold, friends," Thorne boomed, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "The great Walter Finch's masterpiece. A white woman and her coolie lover. Is this the civilization you surveyed for, Finch? Is this what my men sweat and bleed for?" Without waiting for an answer, Thorne pulled a match from his vest, struck it against the heel of his boot, and touched the flame to the corner of the delicate paper. It caught instantly, the hungry fire devouring Walter's work. The crowd gasped as Thorne let the burning drawing fall to the dirt. He then brought his polished boot down, grinding the ashes into the ground with a deliberate, vicious kick. "Some things," Thorne said, his voice cold, "don't deserve to exist." Something inside Walter, something deeper than sorrow, finally broke. It wasn't his heart, which had been pulverized 3 years ago when he found Leanne's body in the canyon, but something more primal. He moved forward, pushing through the stunned crowd, his eyes locked on the smoldering remains. "That was the last image of my daughter," he said, his voice shockingly steady. "And her husband." Thorne's smile didn't waver. "Your daughter chose to lie with filth. And filth doesn't have husbands." A hush fell over the crowd. Even in Harmony Creek, where Thorne's word was law, this felt different. Walter Finch, though pitted, was still a respected man. "You speak of filth," Walter said, his voice quiet but carrying a new, dangerous edge. "Yet I see only one pig here." Thorne moved with a predator's speed. His hand shot out, grabbing Walter by the collar of his worn shirt, yanking him close. "You've forgotten your place, old man." As Thorne's sleeve pulled back, Walter saw it, a distinctive scar on his forearm. 3 parallel lines, like claw marks but too clean, too deliberate. Walter had seen that scar before, in Wei Chen's fevered description of the man who had attacked him and Lian months before they were found. "I know exactly what my place is," Walter replied, his eyes fixed on the scar. "And I know what you did." Surprise flickered in Thorne's eyes before his mask of contempt snapped back into place. He shoved Walter backward, sending the older man stumbling into the dirt. "Clean yourself up, Finch," Thorne spat. "Your days of drawing lines are long over." Sheriff Brody stepped forward, a man caught perpetually between his duty and his paycheck from Thorne. "That's enough, Barrett. Let's not make a scene." Thorne straightened his suit. "There's no scene, Sheriff. Just reminding an old fool that this town has standards." The crowd began to melt away, eager to escape the suffocating orbit of Thorne's anger. Walter pushed himself to his feet, brushing dust from his clothes with as much dignity as he could muster. His eyes never left Thorne's face. 7 days, Walter said, his voice clear in the sudden quiet. Thorne paused, turning back. "What did you say?" 7 days, Walter repeated. From his pocket, he pulled a red silk cord. With deliberate, precise movements, he tied a single, tight knot in it. "In 7 days, I will take back everything you stole." A harsh laugh erupted from Thorne, nervously echoed by his men. "And how do you plan to do that, old man? With your shaking hands and your worthless drawings?" Walter tightened the knot. "You'll see. One day at a time." As Thorne turned away, still chuckling, Walter noticed a small figure at the edge of the crowd. A boy, no more than 8 or 9, with dark hair and striking blue eyes that were a ghostly echo of his daughter's. The child stared at Walter with an intensity that belied his age, then vanished into an alley as Sheriff Brody approached. "That was foolish, Walter," Brody said, his voice low. He was shorter than Walter, with a drooping mustache that seemed to weigh down his face. "Thorne isn't a man to be trifled with." "I'm well past caring about being trifled with, Ben," Walter replied, tucking the knotted cord into his pocket. "Some debts can only be paid in full." Brody shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I respect you. We laid a lot of track together. That's why I'm telling you to let this go. Whatever you think Thorne did." "I don't think." "I know," Walter cut him off. "The question is, what do you know, Ben? And how long have you been paid to forget it?" Brody's face went pale. "I have a wife, Walter. A family." "So did I," Walter said. "Now I have graves." He left the sheriff standing in the street, the acrid smell of burnt paper still hanging in the air. Walter walked with purpose, not toward his small cabin, but to the livery stable where Thorne kept his prize stallion, a powerful black beast named Onyx. He paused across the street, watching as Thorne's men fussed over the animal. He could see into the back of the stable, where a familiar figure was sweeping in the shadows, the boy with Leanne's blue eyes. The child looked up, his gaze meeting Walter's again. This time, Walter was certain. His granddaughter's eyes in a boy's face. Before he could move, Mrs. Gable, who ran the boarding house, hurried toward him, her apron still dusted with flour. "Mr. Finch," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. "You shouldn't be out here." "Not after?" "I'm fine, Helen," Walter assured her, though they both knew it was a lie. "The boy, he brought you something," she whispered, pressing a small, cloth-wrapped package into his hand. "Said you'd understand." Walter unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small piece of intricately carved wood, a miniature dragon so detailed it seemed alive. He recognized the style immediately. It was the work of Wei Chen, Lian's husband, the most skilled woodworker in the territory before he vanished. "Where did he find this?" Walter asked, his voice hoarse. "In Thorne's storehouse," Mrs. Gable replied. "The boy's been working odd jobs all over town. He sees things." "Who is he?" Mrs. Gable hesitated. "He calls himself Bao. Showed up a month ago. Won't say where he's from." Bao. The name Lian and Wei had chosen for their son. Walter closed his fingers around the wooden dragon. "Thank you, Helen. You should get back." She nodded, then paused. "Mr. Finch, whatever you're doing. Thorne has eyes everywhere. And he controls the water. In this drought, that's everything." Walter watched Thorn emerge from the auction house, flanked by his two most loyal men, Nash, a thin, sharp-faced former gambler, and Gideon, a bull-necked enforcer who communicated mostly through violence. Sometimes, Helen, Walter said softly, a man finds himself in the desert with nothing left to lose. That's when he becomes dangerous. Later that night, as darkness fell, Walter made his way to the communal well that Thorn had claimed as his own when the drought began 3 summers ago. Townsfolk now pay dearly for every drop. The well stood unguarded for the moment. Walter approached silently, removed a small vial of red ink from his pocket, and emptied it into the depths. The splash was barely audible. "Day 2, he whispered. "I take your water." From the shadows, Nash watched, a thin smile spreading across his face. The old man was making this far too easy. Meanwhile, in the grand house on the hill Thorn had built as a monument to himself, a strange sound echoed through the halls, the high, broken laughter of a woman, coming from a locked room where no one was supposed to be. Walter woke before dawn. On the wall of his cabin hung a single, perfect ink drawing of Leanne as a child. Beside it was an empty space where Way had once hung a carved wooden frame. With hands that shook less in the cool morning air, Walter began to draw. Not for sale, but with purpose, precision, and a cold, focused rage. As the sun rose, he completed a small drawing on paper, Thorn's prize stallion, Onyx, running wild and free. At the bottom, he wrote, "Day 1. The town was buzzing when Walter arrived at the general store. Mrs. Gable gave him an almost imperceptible nod from across the street. Following her gaze, Walter saw Sheriff Brody standing outside the livery stable, surrounded by agitated men. "What's happened?" Walter asked innocently as he approached. Brody gave him a long, searching look. "Thorn's horse broke loose. Valuable animal. How unfortunate. Did it simply wander off?" "Halter was cut," Brody said pointedly. "Clean slice. Then retired to look like the horse did it himself. And there was something left behind. A drawing. Small 1 inch. Before Brody could say more, Thorn's voice roared from inside the stable. "Find Finch. Bring him to me." Brody gripped Walter's arm. "Whatever game you're playing, you're outmatched. Thorn doesn't lose. Everything and everyone loses eventually, Ben," Walter replied calmly. He turned to see Nash and Gideon striding toward him. "Mr. Thorn wants a word," Nash said, his voice like silk sliding over a knife. "I'm sure he does." Inside the stable, Thorn stood in the empty stall, Walter's small drawing clutched in his hand, his face a mask of fury. "You think this is clever? You think I don't see what you're doing?" "I'm merely an artist, Mr. Thorn," Walter replied. "Expressing myself is all I have left. Listen carefully, old man," Thorn snarled, crumpling the drawing. "I own this town. I own the water, the land, the law. People like you are broken, useless people, exist because I allow it. Is that what you told my daughter before you killed her?" Walter asked softly. The stable fell silent. "You're delusional," Thorn said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Your daughter ran off with that yellow dog. Probably got herself killed in the mountains. I found her body," Walter said, each word a carefully placed stone. "In the canyon. But her husband wasn't with her. And the knife wounds were distinctive." Thorn's face was unreadable, but his right hand moved unconsciously to cover the scar on his left forearm. "You have until sunset to leave my town," he said. "Or I'll have you committed. Everyone knows you haven't been right since your daughter disappeared." 7 days, Walter repeated. "I've already taken your horse. Today, I take your water. Then your sleep. Then your name." Thorn laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "You've lost your mind." "No," Walter said. "I found my purpose." He turned to leave, but Gideon blocked his path. "Mr. Thorn didn't say you could go." Walter stood his ground. "The law says I can. Unless Sheriff Brody plans to arrest me for drawing." Brody, hovering at the entrance, cleared his throat. No crime's been committed that I can prove, Barrett. Can't hold him. Let him go, Thorne waved a dismissive hand. As Walter passed, he added, I've crushed better men than you, Finch. Men who weren't broken old relics. Outside, Walter spotted Bow watching from an alley. He moved casually toward the boy, who waited, serious and still. Hello, Bow, Walter said quietly. You got my package? I did. Your father made that carving. If the boy was surprised, he didn't show it. Ma said you'd know his work anywhere. Your mother was right, Walter confirmed, studying the boy's face. Leanne's eyes, Wei's jawline. Where is your father? Bow glanced around. Pa sent me. Said it was time you knew the truth. But he couldn't come. Not yet. Wei was alive. Walter's heart stuttered. Yes, Bow said. But hurt bad. Thorne's men found us in the hills 3 years back. They killed Ma. Pa fought, but they left him for dead. I was hiding, like Ma told me. And Thorne thinks you're just some orphan boy. Bow nodded. Been watching him. Learning his secrets. There's more. Grandfather, the word was unpracticed. In his house. Someone's locked up. A woman. A woman? Who? Don't know her name. But she screams sometimes. Laughs sometimes. Pa said to find you first. Then her. Walter placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. You are brave, Bow. Your mother would be proud. Pa said you'd help us get justice, Bow said, his young face solemn. Said you were the most honorable man he ever knew. The words were a blow. When Leanne first brought Wei home, a Chinese carpenter with quiet hands and a gentle spirit, Walter had been cold, trapped in the prejudices of his time. It had taken months to see the man his daughter loved. I wasn't always, Walter admitted. But I will be now. We have 6 more days. Can you show me where you found that carving? Bow nodded. Tonight. When Thorne goes to the saloon. As Bow slipped away, Walter felt a new weight settle on him. Not the burden of vengeance, but the responsibility of protection. He had a grandson. And he had 6 days to fulfill his promise. That night, Bow led Walter to a storehouse behind Thorne's mansion. Using a stolen key, they slipped inside. In the moonlight, Walter saw shelves of confiscated property, items taken from those who couldn't pay Thorne's prices. In a chest in the corner lay Wei's fine carving tools, along with letters, a jade hairpin, and a blood-stained silk shawl Walter recognized as Leanne's. He keeps trophies, Walter said, his voice hollow. Footsteps approached. Nash and another man. Walter pulled Bow behind a large crate as the door opened. See? Nothing, one man said. Check behind those crates, Nash ordered. As the lantern light crept closer, Bow moved first. He deliberately knocked over a small metal cup, creating a clatter, and dashed to the opposite side of the storehouse. There, the second man shouted, turning toward the noise. Walter seized the moment. He rose silently, bringing a heavy wooden plank down on the man's head. Nash spun, reaching for his gun, but Walter was on him, his old surveyor's strength surprising him. A sharp blow to the man's throat silenced his cry, and a second to his temple sent him crumpling to the floor. Bow, Walter called softly. The boy emerged, eyes wide. We need to leave. Now. They slipped out into the night. Behind them, the grand house stood silhouetted against the stars, a single upper window illuminated. A pale face appeared briefly at the glass. A woman. That's her, Bow whispered. The one who laughs and screams. Walter stared, a terrible suspicion forming. Tomorrow, he said, his gaze shifting to the town well. We take his water. Then we make him talk later. As the town slept, Walter approached the well again. This time, he carried a small, folded piece of silk. On it was a watercolor sketch of Leanne's face, rendered in paints that would dissolve. "Day 2, he whispered, dropping it into the dark water. "I take your water." By morning, word spread like wildfire. Thorne's horse was gone, 2 of his men were attacked, and now, the well was haunted. Mrs. Gable arrived at Walter's door, brimming with news. "It's working." Abigail Green swears she saw a face in the water. "They're saying it's Leanne's ghost come back for justice." Her expression darkened. Thorne is furious. He's doubled the guards, but people are scared to draw water. "Some say it's poison." She paused. "Walter, who is the woman in his house?" "I believe it's Clara Monroe," Walter said, his brow furrowed. "Judge Monroe's daughter. She and Leanne were inseparable. Clara disappeared the same day." The judge dropped his investigation right after Thorne made a large donation to the courthouse fund. The door burst open. Bao stood there, panting. "Grandfather! They're coming for you." Gideon and 6 men. "Helen, take Bao to O'Connell's smithy," Walter ordered, grabbing his coat. "Tell him it's time." "What about you?" "I'll lead them away." Walter stepped onto his porch just as Gideon and his men rounded the bend. "Walter Finch," Gideon called. "Mr. Thorne wants a word about his storehouse." "I'm an artist, Gideon, not a thief." "Nash says different. Says you nearly killed him." "Nash has an active imagination," Walter said calmly. "Much like the townsfolk who see faces in the well." Gideon's face hardened. "You're coming with us, old man. One way or another." As the men spread out to surround him, Walter feigned surrender, raising his hands. When they were close, he threw a handful of powdered red artist's pigment into Gideon's face. The big man bellowed in pain, momentarily blinded. Walter used the chaos to dart into the dense thicket of mesquite behind his cabin, a game trail only he knew. Gunshots splintered the wood around him, but he was gone, melting into the landscape he knew better than any man alive. By midday, Harmony Creek was a town on edge. Thorne himself arrived at the well, pushing through the nervous crowd. "This is absurd," he snapped. "It's water, nothing more." He drew a ladleful, but as the light caught it, several people gasped. A trick of the light, surely, but the water seemed to have a faint reddish tinge. Thorne hesitated, then threw the water to the ground in disgust. "This is Finch doing. Some kind of paint. Or maybe it's justice coming for you, Barrett Thorne," an old woman called out. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Thorne's control was slipping. In the cool shadows of O'Connell's smithy, the blacksmith examined the wooden dragon. "Your pa had a gift," O'Connell said to Bao. Mrs. Gable handed O'Connell a worn leather journal. "Walter came to me 3 years ago," the blacksmith explained. "Right after Leanne was found. He was half mad with grief, but clear-eyed about one thing: Thorne was responsible. He asked me to keep this safe." A noise outside made them freeze. O'Connell peered through a crack in the wall. "Nash," he whispered. "He's watching the shop. He knows Walter has allies." Walter reached the ruins of an old railroad camp as the sun began to set. He settled in, checking the old revolver he'd kept for years. A figure emerged from the twilight, Sheriff Brody, his hands raised. "I'm alone," Brody said. "I came to talk. About Leanne. About what really happened. 3 years too late, Ben." "I know," Brody admitted, his shoulders slumping. "I've been a coward. I was there, Walter. After Thorne called me to the canyon. I found Leanne dead. Wei was unconscious. Clara Monroe was there, hysterical, trying to help him." "And what did you do?" Walter asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "What I was told," Brody replied, shame in every word. "Thorne said Wei attacked Leanne in a jealous rage. He ordered me to arrest him. But Wei woke up, attacked Thorne, cut him on the arm before they subdued him again. That's when Thorne said he'd handle Wei, and Clara." Privately he finally looked up, his eyes haunted. It wasn't Wei, was it? It was Thorn. Lian had discovered something, papers proving Thorn was forging land deeds, stealing from the Chinese railroad workers. The sound of footsteps announced Mrs. Gable and Bao. "Thank God you're safe," she said. She produced a Connell's journal. The blacksmith said this was important. It was evidence, names, dates, details of Thorn's crimes. With this and Clara's testimony, we could bring him to justice legally, Walter said. Thorn owns the law here, Brody reminded him. Not all of it, Walter countered. Marshal Davenport in Carson City has no love for Thorn. If we can get Clara and this evidence to him, he'd never let you leave town, Brody warned. Then we bring Davenport here, Walter decided. But first, we get to Clara. As night fell, they formulated a plan. They needed a distraction, something big enough to draw every eye away from the house. Mrs. Gable's eyes lit up. The well. Walter nodded slowly. Day 3. I take his sleep. None of them noticed Nash slipping away from the shadows, a triumphant smile on his lips. Thorn paced his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Nash entered. Found him, sir. At the old railroad camp. With the boy, Mrs. Gable, and Sheriff Brody. Thorn went still. Brody. Yes, sir. And the boy, they're calling him Bao. Says his Finch's grandson. Lian and Wei Chen's son. The crystal glass shattered in Thorn's hand. They also mentioned the woman upstairs. Said they need to free Clara. Prepare the men, Thorn ordered, his voice deadly calm. Tomorrow night, we end this. Permanently. Dawn broke with an ominous crimson glow. Walter completed his third drawing, Thorn's mansion, every window lit, shadows of sleepless figures pacing within. Day 3, I take your sleep. Brody arrived, his face grim. Thorn knows everything. Nash saw us. Good, Walter said, surprising the sheriff. When a man like Thorn feels cornered, he makes mistakes. Bao insisted on going into town. They'll be looking for you and Sheriff Brody, not me. I can get to Clara. Walter knew the boy was right. He pressed a small, carved wooden eagle into Bao's hand. Show this to Clara. She'll know it came from Wei. Bao moved through town with practiced invisibility. He slipped into Thorn's mansion through the kitchen, a skill learned during his weeks of observation. He found Clara's room and picked the lock. Clara Munro sat by the window, a woman whose beauty had been transfigured by suffering. Who are you? She asked, her voice steady. Bao Chen. Lian's son. Her composure cracked. Lian's, not possible. I was born after, Bao explained, holding out the eagle. Grandfather sent this. We're getting you out tonight. A bitter smile touched her lips. I've tried to escape 17 times. It's different now. Sheriff Brody is with us. And PA's alive. The news struck Clara like a physical blow. Tears welled in her eyes. James is alive. Yes. And we know Thorn killed Ma. Listen carefully, Clara said urgently. There's more. Thorn isn't just stealing land. He's selling water rights to the mining companies upriver. They're diverting the Harmony River. That's why the drought has been so severe. Footsteps approached. Go. Clara whispered. The servant stares. Tonight, when the church bell strikes 9. Be ready. As dusk fell, Harmony Creek held its breath. Nash and Gideon patrolled the streets, their hands on their guns. In the saloon, Nash watched the street, an uneasy feeling growing. Something glinted from the roof of the general store. A mirror. A signal. He recognized the boy just as he disappeared. The general store. Nash yelled to the guards at the well. As they ran, a low rumble vibrated through the street. The ground beneath the well heaved, and then, with a deafening roar, water erupted in a massive geyser. O'Connell's dynamite had breached an underground channel, releasing the pent-up pressure from the diverted river. In the ensuing chaos, Walter, Brodie, and O'Connell moved toward the mansion. Thorne watched from his study window as water flooded the town square. A roar of rage tore from his throat. He grabbed his rifle just as the study door burst open. Walter Finch stood there, flanked by Brodie and O'Connell. "Hello, Barrett," Walter said calmly. "Trouble sleeping?" Thorne's rifle snapped up, but Brodie was faster. "Don't," the former sheriff warned. "This isn't about justice, Barrett," Walter said, holding up a new, larger drawing, a portrait of Thorne's face, etched with cruelty and defeat. "It's about truth. Marshal Davenport arrives tomorrow. Your partners at the mining company have already sold you out." For the first time, genuine fear flickered in Thorne's eyes. "I'm here," a new voice said. Clara stood in the doorway, bow at her side. "I let myself out," she held up a small key. "And I am prepared to testify to everything." Thorne lunged for her, but Walter intercepted him with a solid punch. Thorne broke free, his hand diving for a hidden revolver in his desk. "Nobody move," he shouted. The gunshot was deafening. Thorne staggered, shock on his face as a red stain spread across his vest. In the doorway stood a figure none had expected. Wei Chen, his face scarred but his aim true, a smoking rifle in his hands. "That," Wei said quietly, "was for Lian." Thorne collapsed. You were supposed to be dead." "So was the truth," Wei replied. But some things refused to stay buried. As Thorne fell, horses thundered outside. Nash and Gideon had returned with a dozen men. "We're outnumbered," Brodie said grimly. "Not quite," Wei countered. He raised a hand. From the surrounding darkness, more figures emerged, silent and disciplined, members of a tong from the city, men loyal to Wei's family. "My father's people," Wei explained. "They've been waiting for this night as long as we have." Outside, the two groups converged. The final battle for Harmony Creek was about to begin as Day 3 drew to its bloody close. Gunfire ripped through the night. Walter, Wei, and the others were pinned down in Thorne's study. "We need to get out," Walter shouted. "Gideon will have men at every exit." "Wait," Brodie whispered, listening. Heavy footsteps approached a back staircase. It was Gideon. Brodie stepped out, his revolver leveled. "That's far enough." Gideon raised his hands, his face a mask of pragmatism. "For against one. Better odds than Thorne got." "Where's Nash?" Wei demanded. A thin smile touched Gideon's lips. "Headed to town with 6 men. Said it was time to tie up loose ends at the boarding house. Make an example." Walter's blood ran cold. He looked at the hulking enforcer. "You don't seem upset about your employer's death." Gideon shrugged. "Thorne paid well, but loyalty ends with the paycheck. Nash, though, he's a mad dog. Thorne kept him on a leash. Now the leash is gone. If you want to walk away from this," Wei said, his eyes boring into Gideon's, "you'll help us stop him." Gideon considered. "What's in it for me?" "Your life," Wei replied simply. "There's a faster way to town," Gideon decided. Through the old mineshaft behind the stables. As they raced through the subterranean tunnels, Walter felt time pressing down. Day 4 was dawning, the day he had promised to take Thorne's name. Now it was a race to save the town itself. Bow, Mrs. Gable, and Clara hid in the shadows at the edge of town. They saw Nash and his men ride past, headed for the boarding house. "We can't get through," Mrs. Gable whispered. "My father's house," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "It's closer. And I know where he kept a shotgun." They navigated the back alleys, guided by Bow's intimate knowledge of the town's hidden pathways. Inside the dusty, sheet-draped house, Clara opened a wall safe. Inside was not only the shotgun but a packet of documents sealed with wax. "Evidence," Clara whispered. "My father was building a case against Thorne. He left town because Thorne threatened to kill me if he didn't. They're coming, Mrs. Gable warned from the window. Nash and 2 others, headed right for us. Clara raised the shotgun, her resolve hardening. I'm done hiding. Helen, you take Bow and these documents. Get to the church. Thomas will look for you there. As the front door splintered under Nash's boot, Clara braced herself in the study. Come then, she murmured. Let's finish this. A shotgun blast echoed through the night as Walter and his group emerged from the mineshaft. Judge Monroe's house, O'Connell said. They ran, arriving to see Nash dragging a struggling Clara from the house, using her as a shield. The street erupted in gunfire. Walter slipped away, circling to the back of the house. He found the kitchen door ajar and entered cautiously. From the cellar, Bow and Mrs. Gable emerged. Grandfather! Bow whispered, rushing into his arms. Mrs. Gable handed Walter the packet. Eliza said these prove everything. A crash from outside intensified the gunfight. Bow, show Helen the way to the church, Walter ordered. I'm staying with you, the boy insisted. Pa needs me. I know this house. There's a hidden panel from the study to the parlor. Thomas followed his grandson. Through a gap behind a bookcase, he saw Nash holding Clara, his gun to her head. A floorboard creaked under Walter's weight. Nash spun. In that instant, Clara drove her elbow into his ribs, wrenching herself partially free. Walter fired, his bullet grazing Nash's shoulder. The man staggered, returning fire wildly. One bullet struck Walter in the arm, spinning him against the wall. Bow burst from the passage, throwing himself at Nash, disrupting his aim. Nash snarled, striking the boy savagely. As he turned his revolver on the fallen child, the parlor window shattered. Wei crashed through, tackling Nash. They grappled for the gun. Just as Nash gained the upper hand, another figure appeared in the broken window. Gideon, his own weapon aimed with steady precision. That's enough, Nash. You're with them? Nash spat in disbelief. I told you, Gideon said. Women and children. That's my line. Nash made his choice, swinging his gun toward Gideon. 2 shots rang out almost as one. Nash collapsed, a fatal wound in his chest. His last, spasmodic shot hit a ceiling beam. The old house groaned and began to collapse. They staggered out onto the porch just as the roof caved in, burying Nash in a tomb of his own making. In the sudden quiet, the town began to emerge from the darkness. Lights appeared in windows. Martha arrived from the church with a group of armed townsfolk. Is it over? She asked. Walter looked at his reunited family. Wei holding Bow, Clara leaning on Gideon's steadying arm, Brody and O'Connell standing guard. Not quite, he said. The eastern sky was already growing light. Day 4, he murmured. I take his name. The church bell began to toll, a declaration that the time for secrets and shadows was over. Dawn washed over Harmony Creek, revealing a town battered but not broken. Walter sat on the church steps while Mrs. Gable bandaged his arm. In the square, the townspeople gathered, listening as Wei and Clara explained the night's events. A column of riders approached from the east, federal marshals, led by a distinguished man who introduced himself as Marshal Davenport. Captain Finch, he said, shaking Walter's hand. Your telegram suggested urgency. It seems we arrived just in time for the cleanup. The next few hours were a whirlwind of official statements. Davenport set up a temporary court in the church. Townsfolk lined up to give testimony. Gideon, true to his word, led the marshals to Thorne's real ledgers, hidden in his bank office, detailing a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of the territory. Walter stood by the well, now flowing freely. Bow joined him. Is it really over, grandfather? Thorne's reign is over, Walter said. The work of rebuilding is just beginning. Marshal Davenport emerged onto the church steps. Citizens of Harmony Creek, he announced. By federal order, all lands illegally acquired by Barrett Thorne are returned to their rightful owners. The illegal diversion of the Harmony River is to cease immediately. And I am appointing an interim council to oversee this town until proper elections can be held. He gestured to Walter, Way, Brody, Mrs. Gable, and O'Connell. The crowd roared its approval. We accept, Walter called out. With one condition. The name. Thorne's name should no longer hang over this town. A reasonable request, Davenport said. Have you a proposal? Walter looked at his family, at the hopeful faces around him. He thought of the water, the truth, the new beginning. Justice Springs, he suggested. A cheer went up. Justice Springs it is, the marshal declared. Later, Walter returned to his cabin. From his pocket, he withdrew the red silk cord. One by one, he untied the 4 knots, Thorne's horse, his water, his sleep, his name. As the last knot came loose, Gideon appeared in the doorway. The marshals cleared me to leave, he said. Where will you go? Walter asked. Gideon shrugged. Somewhere people don't know the name Thorne. Or Gideon, he looked at the small paintings on Walter's table. Strange thing. Worked for Thorne 7 years. Never knew he could be beaten until you came along with your drawings and your knots. It wasn't the drawings, Walter replied. It was the truth. Truth has a power all its own. That evening, the whole town gathered at the boarding house. It was a celebration of survival and rebirth. Judge Monroe had arrived with the marshals, and a tearful reunion with Clara brought a sense of closure to one of the town's deepest wounds. Walter found himself on the porch, looking out at the town that was already beginning to heal. The sign bearing Thorne's name was gone. Lights burned brightly where fear had once ruled. Bow joined him. What are you thinking about? The boy asked. About time, Walter smiled. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. Now, I find myself with a future I never imagined. Pa says sometimes the best pictures come from the canvases you thought were ruined, Bow said with a child's simple wisdom. He hesitated. He also says we should rebuild our house where it used to be. He wants to know if you'd like to build your studio there, too. So we could all be together. A profound warmth spread through Walter, knitting together the last broken pieces of his heart. I would like that very much, Bow. From inside, a fiddle struck up a hopeful tune. Couples began to dance. What happens tomorrow, grandfather? Walter put an arm around his grandson's shoulders. Tomorrow, he said, as a shooting star blazed across the sky, we begin day 5. Not for vengeance, but for rebuilding. He looked through the doorway at Way and Clara, sharing a tentative dance, at Mrs. Gable and O'Connell, raising a glass with Marshal Davenport, at a community finding its feet. The story was just beginning. Thomas Harlow stepped across the threshold, his steady hands reaching out to embrace the future that awaited them all.